A mother in Warsaw kissed her children goodbye on a sunny September morning in 1939. She promised to buy bread and return before lunch. She never came home. By noon, German bombs were falling like deadly rain across her neighborhood. The bakery was rubble. The streets were rivers of broken glass and blood. And across the city, families were being torn apart forever. In London, children huddled in subway tunnels as the earth shook above them. In Leningrad, a teacher ate wallpaper paste to survive another day. In the Philippines, American soldiers made their last stand, knowing no help was coming. In the forests of Eastern Europe, entire villages vanished without a trace. For 6 years, the world burned. Entire cities were erased from maps. Millions of people simply disappeared. Families were destroyed, nations fell, and humanity faced a single, terrifying question. Would civilization itself survive? This was World War II, the war that changed everything. And once it began, there was no going back. To understand the horror that followed, we must first see what was destroyed. The late 1930s were not a dark age. In many ways, they represented the peak of human achievement and optimism. In America, families gathered around radios in their living rooms, listening to jazz music and comedy shows. The golden age of Hollywood was in full swing. People danced to swing music and believed in progress. The future looked bright. In Britain, the empire spanned a quarter of the globe. London was the financial center of the world. British families took pride in their navy, their democracy, and their belief that right always triumphed over might. In France, cafes lined the boulevards of Paris. Artists painted in Montmartre. Families picnicked along the Seine on Sunday afternoons. The French believed their army was unbeatable, protected by the mighty Maginot Line. Even in the Soviet Union, despite Stalin's terror, there was industrial pride. Factories were being built, cities were growing. Soviet citizens believed they were creating a workers' paradise. The world was connected like never before. Ocean liners carried passengers between continents in luxury. Telegraph cables stretched across the ocean floors. Radio broadcasts could reach millions of people at once. International trade flourished. The future seemed limitless. But hidden in this beautiful, connected world was the seed of its own destruction. The same technology that brought people together would soon tear them apart. The same factories that made cars would make tanks. The same radio waves that broadcast music would broadcast propaganda. The same ocean liners that carried tourists would carry soldiers. In Germany, something dark was stirring. A failed artist named Adolf Hitler had taken control of a proud but wounded nation. Germany had lost World War I just 20 years earlier. The German people felt humiliated, angry, and desperate for someone to blame. Hitler gave them enemies: Jews, communists, foreigners, anyone who was different. He promised to make Germany great again. He promised revenge. And millions of Germans, hungry for hope and hungry for someone to hate, listened. The Nazi Party didn't rise to power overnight. They were patient. They used democracy to destroy democracy. They used the law to break the law. They used violence while claiming to be victims. And step by step, they transformed one of the most educated, cultured nations on Earth into a war machine. By 1939, Germany had become something the world had never seen before. A modern industrial nation completely devoted to conquest and hatred. They had the best scientists, the most advanced factories, and the most disciplined army on Earth. And they were ready to use all of it. At 4:45 a.m. on September 1st, 1939, the German battleship Schleswig-Holstein opened fire on a Polish fort. It was supposed to be a limited attack, a small border dispute. Instead, it was the first shot of the deadliest war in human history. Within hours, over 1 million German troops poured across the Polish border. Tanks rolled through Polish wheat fields. Planes rained bombs on Polish cities. And the world watched in shock as the German military demonstrated a new kind of warfare: blitzkrieg, lightning war. Poland had a proud military tradition. They had cavalry regiments that traced their history back centuries. They had brave soldiers and strong fortifications. But they also had horses facing tanks, swords facing machine guns, and courage facing industrial murder. Within weeks, Poland was crushed. But that was just the beginning. The German war machine didn't stop with Poland. It couldn't stop. Hitler had created a system that could only survive by constantly attacking, constantly expanding, constantly finding new victims. In April 1940, German forces invaded Denmark and Norway. The Danes surrendered in 6 hours. The Norwegians fought bravely, but were overwhelmed in weeks. The speed was terrifying. Then came the blow that shocked the world. On May 10, 1940, German armies struck Belgium, Holland, and France all at once. These weren't weak countries. France had the largest army in Europe. They had strong allies. They had concrete fortifications that were supposed to be impregnable. None of it mattered. The Germans didn't attack where they were expected. Instead, they sent their tanks through the impassable Ardennes forest. In just 6 weeks, France, the great power of Europe, the nation that had resisted Germany for 4 years in the previous war, surrendered. The footage of German soldiers marching down the Champs-Élysées in Paris was seen around the world. The French government fled. French families wept as Nazi flags flew over the Eiffel Tower. The impossible had happened. France had fallen. Britain now stood alone. The Royal Navy was strong, but could ships defend against an entire continent? German planes filled the skies over London. Air raid sirens wailed. Children were evacuated to the countryside. Families slept in subway tunnels. During the Blitz, London was bombed for 76 straight nights. Every evening, families would gather their belongings and head underground. They brought blankets, food, and books. They sang songs to keep up their spirits. They told jokes to fight the fear. But every night, more buildings were destroyed. More neighbors didn't come home. The German U-boats prowled the Atlantic like wolves, sinking British supply ships. Food was rationed. Gasoline was scarce. Britain was slowly starving. But somehow they held on. Then, on June 22, 1941, Hitler made the decision that would doom him. Despite having a peace treaty with Stalin, he launched the largest invasion in human history against the Soviet Union. Operation Barbarossa sent 3 million German soldiers across a front stretching from the Baltic Sea to the Black Sea. At first, it seemed like another lightning victory. Soviet armies collapsed. Millions of Soviet soldiers were captured. German tanks raced across the endless Russian plains toward Moscow. Soviet civilians fled eastward in panic. But Russia was different. Russia was vast, Russia was brutal, and Russia was willing to pay any price to survive. Stalin ordered a scorched earth strategy. As Soviet forces retreated, they burned everything: crops, factories, bridges, entire cities. They left the Germans nothing but ash and snow. When winter came, the German soldiers froze. They had prepared for a quick victory, not a long siege. Their trucks wouldn't start, their weapons jammed, their soldiers got frostbite, and the Red Army, equipped for winter warfare, began to fight back. Meanwhile, on the other side of the world, Japan was building its own empire of conquest. Like Germany, Japan felt humiliated by the previous war. Like Germany, Japan blamed foreigners for its problems. And like Germany, Japan decided the answer was violence. On December 7, 1941, Japanese planes attacked the American naval base at Pearl Harbor. Americans were eating breakfast on a quiet Sunday morning when the bombs began falling. Ships exploded, sailors burned. Over 2,400 Americans died in a few hours. President Franklin Roosevelt called it a date which will live in infamy. The next day, America entered the war. The sleeping giant had awakened. By 1942, the war had become truly global. Battles raged on every continent except Antarctica. But this wasn't just a war between armies. It was a war against civilians, a war against humanity itself. In German-occupied Europe, something unimaginable was happening. The Nazis weren't just conquering countries, they were trying to reshape reality itself. They built camps where human beings were processed like factory goods. They turned murder into an industrial system. Jewish families were torn from their homes and packed into cattle cars. They were told they were being relocated for work. Instead, they were taken to places with names that would become synonymous with evil: Auschwitz, Treblinka, Sobibor. The killers kept detailed records. They photographed their victims. They saved their belongings. They turned mass murder into bureaucracy. 6 million Jews died. Millions of others, Roma, disabled people, political prisoners, Soviet POWs, were also systematically murdered. The rest of the world was slow to believe these reports. The scale of the killing was beyond human comprehension. How could civilized people do such things? How could an entire nation participate in genocide? But the evidence was everywhere. Refugees told stories of horror. Allied intelligence gathered reports. And gradually, the terrible truth became clear. The Nazis weren't just fighting a war. They were trying to exterminate entire peoples. Yet even in the darkest moments, resistance flickered. In the Warsaw Ghetto, Jewish fighters held off the German army for a month with nothing but homemade weapons and desperate courage. In Yugoslavia, partisans fought a guerrilla war in the mountains. In France, the resistance sabotaged German operations and saved Allied airmen. And slowly, the tide began to turn. American factories, protected by two oceans, became the arsenal of democracy. Women who had never worked outside their homes learned to build planes and tanks. American shipyards launched a new Liberty ship every day. In the Pacific, American Marines island hopped toward Japan, fighting brutal battles on places most people had never heard of: Guadalcanal, Iwo Jima, Okinawa. Each island cost thousands of lives, but each island brought them closer to Japan. In the Soviet Union, the Red Army had learned to fight the German way. Soviet factories, moved beyond the Ural Mountains, produced tanks and planes in massive numbers. Soviet soldiers, hardened by years of suffering, pushed the Germans back yard by bloody yard. On June 6, 1944, D-Day, Allied forces landed on the beaches of Normandy. After years of planning, the Western Allies had finally opened the Second Front. German soldiers, many of them teenagers, defended the beaches with desperate courage, but they were outnumbered and overwhelmed. The invasion succeeded, but barely. Thousands of young men died in the surf, shot down before they could reach the beach. Those who made it ashore fought house by house, street by street, to establish a foothold in Europe. By early 1945, Germany was being crushed between two massive armies. From the west, American and British forces crossed the Rhine. From the east, Soviet forces fought their way toward Berlin. The Nazi Empire was collapsing. In his bunker beneath Berlin, Adolf Hitler refused to surrender. Even as Soviet shells fell on the city above, he ordered his people to fight to the death. He preferred to see Germany destroyed rather than admit defeat. On April 30th, 1945, Hitler shot himself. 1 week later, Germany surrendered unconditionally. In cities across the Allied world, people poured into the streets to celebrate. They danced, they cried, they kissed strangers. The war in Europe was over. But the war in the Pacific continued. Japan, surrounded and bombed daily, still refused to surrender. American planners prepared for Operation Downfall, the invasion of Japan itself. They expected 1 million American casualties. Then, on August 6, 1945, everything changed. An American bomber called the Enola Gay dropped a single bomb on the city of Hiroshima. The bomb contained the power of the sun itself. At 8:15 a.m., Hiroshima simply vanished. A flash brighter than 1,000 suns. A mushroom cloud that rose into the stratosphere. Buildings, people, everything within miles of the explosion was vaporized instantly. Survivors described shadows burned into walls where people had been standing. 3 days later, a second atomic bomb destroyed Nagasaki. On August 15th, Emperor Hirohito announced Japan's surrender. World War II was finally over. The silence that followed was eerie. After 6 years of constant warfare, the guns fell silent. But the world they revealed was unrecognizable. The numbers are almost impossible to comprehend. Between 70 and 85 million people died, more than the entire population of Germany. The Soviet Union lost 27 million citizens. Poland lost 20% of its population. China lost 20 million. Japan lost 3 million. The United States lost 400,000. But behind every number was a person. A mother who never came home. A father who died far from his children. A child who grew up without parents. Entire families were erased. Entire communities disappeared. Cities that had stood for centuries were now rubble. Dresden, a jewel of European architecture, was a moonscape. Hiroshima and Nagasaki were atomic shadows. Manila, Rotterdam, Stalingrad, all were destroyed and had to be rebuilt from nothing. When Allied soldiers liberated the concentration camps, they found horrors beyond imagination. Piles of corpses, living skeletons, gas chambers disguised as shower rooms. Even hardened soldiers vomited when they saw what human beings had done to other human beings. Yet from this destruction came unexpected changes. The old European empires, weakened by war, began to crumble. India gained independence. African nations demanded freedom. The age of European dominance was ending. Women, who had proven themselves capable of any job during the war, refused to go back to being second-class citizens. The civil rights movement in America gained momentum as black veterans returned home having fought for democracy abroad. The United Nations was created to prevent future wars. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights proclaimed that all people had inherent dignity. The world was trying to build something better from the ashes. But the war had also unleashed forces that would shape the next century. The United States and Soviet Union, allies in war, became enemies in peace. The Cold War began before the Hot War had even ended. Nuclear weapons meant that the next World War could destroy civilization entirely. The psychological scars ran deeper than any physical destruction. An entire generation had grown up knowing that civilization was fragile, that neighbors could become enemies overnight, that evil could triumph if good people did nothing. Holocaust survivors struggled to rebuild their lives from nothing. Veterans returned home with nightmares they couldn't explain. Children who had been evacuated from cities grew up not trusting that safety was permanent. Literature and art changed. Writers like Kurt Vonnegut and Primo Levi tried to make sense of the senseless. Artists painted abstract works because realistic art no longer seemed adequate to capture the horror they had witnessed. The war had proved that human beings were capable of both incredible heroism and unimaginable evil. Sometimes the same person was capable of both. The comfortable assumptions about progress and civilization had been shattered forever. Today, World War II feels like ancient history to many people. The last veterans are dying, the survivors are passing away. Soon there will be no one left who remembers. But look around you. Refugees fleeing war-torn countries seeking safety in foreign lands. Propaganda spreading through social media faster than truth. Authoritarian leaders rising to power by blaming minorities for complex problems. Economic crisis creating desperation that extremists exploit. Sound familiar? The technology has changed, but human nature hasn't. We still love our families, we still fear for our futures, we still look for someone to blame when things go wrong, and we're still capable of both great good and great evil. The lesson of World War II isn't that evil will always lose. Evil won plenty of battles. The lesson is that ordinary people, when they stand together, can defeat extraordinary evil. But only if they act before it's too late. Democracy isn't a machine that runs by itself. Freedom isn't a natural state that maintains itself. Peace isn't the absence of conflict. It's the result of constant work by people who refuse to let hate triumph. World War II was humanity's greatest test. We barely passed. The question is, are we ready for the next one? Because tests have a way of repeating, and the stakes keep getting higher.